the introduction here, Councilor Shu already provided some spoilers. Until 3 months ago, I was actually the supervisor of traffic safety operations here at the city of Richmond Hill. And now I'm back in engineering consulting, where I spent almost a decade before. So got a pretty decent exposure in traffic safety. I work with this company, True North Safety Group. It's a small group of consultants. We provide services like forensic investigations. We work with lawyers quite often, investigating specific collisions that might have happened on the road. And we also do consulting services, which is the more proactive aspect of traffic safety. And the third square here is just a piece of software that many public sector organizations use to manage their traffic data. So I have a bit of an agenda here, topics we're going to talk about related to traffic safety. So we're going to talk about the Vision Zero concept. Some of you may have heard that term before, and how it relates to safe systems principles and how they are applying planning and design in the urban environment. And then we're going to talk a little bit about speed management, traffic calming, and what Richmond Hill and York region are doing in that regard. So to get into the topics, the Vision Zero concept is a concept that was originated in Sweden and then was quickly followed by the Netherlands, Australia, New Zealand in the 1990s. It's actually a concept that comes from the industrial environment, keeping employees safe in a factory, that kind of thing. And it was in the 90s in Sweden, it was brought into the traffic environment, right? So the key concept is, or the key guiding principle is that no loss of life is acceptable. Historically, transportation system has been designed to be efficient, to move people efficiently, right? We gotta get to work quickly. We can't spend too much time sitting in traffic. That didn't work out very well because over the decades, of course, cities grow and there's more cars on the street, and you end up losing time in traffic anyway. But building on that principle that no loss of life is acceptable, some other components to that philosophy include the fact that everyone has the right to move safely everywhere. System planners, designers, builders, operators, policymakers, they all share the responsibility to provide a safe system to the population, regardless of what mode people choose. So if you're walking, if you're driving, taking transit, the system should be safe. You shouldn't have to run the risk of losing your life because you're just moving around the city, right? And it has a strong focus on reducing the risk of fatalities and serious injuries. Serious injuries being the ones that lead to admission to the hospital. That's really the focus. So the fender benders, the little collisions, that's not really what this concept is about. It's about the people and not the property, right? This is just a little graph showing how it was implemented in Sweden. So as you can see in the beginning, 1990s, when the concept was brought into traffic, their rates of deaths was up there, and that six people killed in road crashes per 100,000 inhabitants. And then over time, as they implemented measures that focus on addressing these serious injury collisions, we can see a clear reduction in that rate, right? So it is an effective approach to traffic safety. It was then adopted, and it's still being adopted by many jurisdictions in the United States. So we can see here from coast to coast, there's a bunch of municipalities that adopted this philosophy as a strategy for traffic safety. And also in Canada, we have, this list is probably bigger now. It says 2 provinces, 20 cities, and 2 regions adopted the Vision Zero concept, and then a few others considering or developing. That list is probably bigger now. And then in terms of implementing this or making this Vision Zero tangible, there are some principles that need to be followed to create safe systems, right? So the first one is that, as I mentioned before, fatal or serious injuries are unacceptable. Humans make mistakes and are vulnerable. So again, in the past, the philosophy was if you got into a collision, you did something wrong. 90%, that's a number that's since 15, 20 years ago when I got into this, into studying this field, that was the magic number. 90% of collisions has some human error element into it, and then we just blame the driver for 90% of the cases. But as this philosophy developed, the paradigm has shifted more towards recognizing that people are going to make mistakes, and sometimes when they make mistakes, they're going to get hurt. So we designed a system around that reality, right? Other 2 principles, responsibility is shared, like I mentioned before. It's not just the driver, it's the engineers, it's the policymakers, the planners. Everybody is, and the police, of course, everybody plays a role in delivering a safe system. And the last one is that redundancy is vital. What does that mean? So in the traffic system, you have the road users, right? Drivers, pedestrians, cyclists. You have the vehicles. The vehicles are traveling at a certain speed, and they're traveling on the road. And in the event that a collision happens, you have post-collision care. It's the emergency response that's going to potentially make a difference of whether you have just a little a minor injury, or if you're going to spend a lot of time in the hospital, or potentially even become a fatality, right? So the principle of the redundancy is that you design the system so that you really need all of these elements to fail to actually lead to serious injury or death. So if you're too tired while you're driving, you fell asleep, and you run off the road, there's a guide rail that is going to stop you from falling down the embankment, right? So maybe you're just going to get some bruises instead of going to the hospital or even dying. Same thing with speed, right? What makes people get seriously injured is the energy that their body absorbs in a collision. So if they're traveling at higher speeds, there's a bigger chance that they're going to absorb more of that energy. That's what's gonna hurt people. So in terms of planning and design of the urban environment, especially, building a safe system starts with the urban and the land use planning, right? It's the foundation that's going to lead to a road system that's going to be effective, more effective or less effective decades from now in terms of keeping people safe. That's why it's important to consider these principles early in the process, because what we experience now was planned and designed 50, 60 years ago, right? The way that our cities, North America is very blessed with a lot of land to develop, but the other side of the coin is that we developed too much, too spread out. So you have to travel very long distances to get to work, or even to go to the grocery store, right? Sometimes you live in a place you can't just walk to a corner store. You have to take a 10-minute drive to the Loblaws or something like that. And good planning goals that align with this safe system principle includes reducing the need to travel, making services and amenities located closer to home, reducing the length of trips. If you have convenient access to transit, you can just walk a few minutes to a transit stop and then continue your trip in a safer type of vehicle. And also manage speeds with the physical environment. Again, we put too much blame on the drivers for not respecting the speed limits, but we're gonna have some a slide later on that's going to illustrate that principle. So a bit of a personal experience in terms of that type of concept of urban development. A bit over 10 years ago, I got an internship with York Region in their East Gwillimbury office. So this map here is around the urban areas around Newmarket, and their office was a little past Highway 404. It was a 10-kilometer trip, 15 minutes, not too bad, right? Problem was that I was a student, new to Canada, I didn't have a car. Right, so that 15 minutes was the time it took me to get to the bus stop. Right, and then I would have to take 2 buses. I don't know if the transfer would be effective, right? I had to reserve 1 hour for a 10-kilometer trip. And I was staying at a friend's house in Newmarket. He lived in a kind of a crescent like that. So I had to walk around. That was a 1 kilometer walk just to get to the bus stop. But if there was like a tiny little connection there to the sidewalk on the major road, that would cut my walking by half, right? I forgot to mention that was in the winter too, so it wasn't very funny. Still remember a pretty bad ice storm that we had one day, and yeah, wasn't a good day. and then the question is, in which of these scenarios would we prefer to be, right? Do we want to sit in traffic for 1 hour to cross the GTA to get to work? Or maybe do we want to be in an urban environment where you have the option to take a subway, park your bike, walk around? There's going to be corner stores over there, right? How much time are we spending sitting in traffic every day when we could be either spending less time or spending the same time in the train where you could be doing other things like reading. And like I said before, that's a result of what was done, what was started 50, 60 years ago, right? So we have these huge subdivisions in North America. It's all residential houses. Like I said before, if you want to go to the grocery store, you're not just taking a stroll, right? You've got to take your car and drive 10, 15 minutes, right? And the image on the right, obviously, you'll have residential development at above ground level, and then you have stores, so you may not even need a car, right? So in terms of advantages and disadvantages of each option, the list is longer than this. I'm just giving some examples, right? But in terms of traffic congestion, if you have low density development, like subdivisions, you're gonna have that congestion mostly on longer roads. That image of the Highway 401, everybody stop. High density development, you can have some congestion on the local streets too, but also the families tend to own fewer cars, right? So it's not as many cars on the road at the same time. Travel mode options, you need to have a car with low density, but with high density you have the option, right? Maybe a bike will do it, maybe you can just walk. or you have convenient access to transit. In terms of safety, which is the topic of the seminar, right? Low density development, you have more exposure to collisions because you're traveling longer, you're traveling for longer, right? You're spending 1 hour in traffic, traveling sometimes 50 kilometers to get to work. So you have that exposure even if the system is well designed. So just the fact that you're out of your house interacting with other people on the road, that exposes you to traffic accidents. High density, you would have less exposure to accidents if your system is well designed. You have environmental considerations as well. Obviously, more individual cars on the road, it's more greenhouse gas emissions, right? Clean energy, electrical cars, still pretty early in their development. It's gonna get better over time. But if you have a good transit network, many buses, or even the trains, they're using electrical, sometimes hydrogen, fuel cells, things that don't pollute as much. Taxes, sure, everybody loves paying taxes, right? So with low density, the taxes tend to be higher because it's more roads that you have, it's more infrastructure that you have to maintain, right? And the older infrastructure gets, the more it costs to maintain. If you live in a high density, if you develop at a higher density, there's more people within, let's say, 1 kilometer, well, there's more people to share the maintenance costs, right? And obviously social interactions, right? If you're in that picture here, maybe you know a few neighbors, maybe not, but there's like everybody's in the backyard. You don't get out of the house without planning in advance, right? While something like this, you might just meet people on the road, on the street, and interact more in terms of social interaction. Many of you probably saw this picture before. It's the space it takes to transport, 40 or 60 people by bus, by cycling, and by private car. Obviously, this looks a lot more like congestion than the other two pictures. Safety of different modes is also pretty stark different. The tall bars there, the green ones, is death rates for private cars, and the light blue ones for buses. So there's no comparison, right? There's a bit of a spike there during the COVID period, probably because there were fewer cars on the road and speeds could be higher, right? Less congestion, more speed, and then it experienced a little bit of a bump. If you look at all collisions, there was a drop, but in the US at least, during COVID, there was a bit of an increase in deaths. So going into the speed, a bit more detail on the speed. This is a graph that illustrates pedestrian survivability. So if you're hit by a car at 30 kilometers per hour, you have 90% chance of surviving. 50 kilometers per hour, that drops to 60%. And just 10 more kilometers per hour, 60, the chance of survival is only 20%. So it's a pretty dramatic increase in risk with what looks like a small increase in speed, right? If you double your speed, you multiply your risk by 8. And in terms of how we ideally would like to design our roads is so that they are self-enforceable, right? So these three pictures, they show local streets, local residential streets, right? The top left one, it's fairly easy to get to 50, 60 kilometers per hour. The top right one, a lot of parked vehicles on both sides of the road. the environment is more constrained, it's not as easy to get up to super high speeds, right? And the one on the bottom is the concept of shared streets, right? Like everything is designed for pedestrians, but they allow cars. You're very rarely going to see someone going more than 20, 25 kilometers per hour because the way the road is designed makes drivers travel at the speed compatible with that design. And this is regardless of what speed limit sign is posted. You can post whatever you want. The majority of drivers will take cues from their surroundings. Now, obviously, many roads have already been designed and built, and they don't all look like the one on the top right and on the bottom, right? Many look more like the top left. So, while ideally you want to design them so that they are self-enforceable, there are ways to control speeds after they're built, right? The top here, just to give some perspective, because we have so many cars and we have to accommodate on-street parking on most of our roads, we end up with super wide lanes that if there's not a lot of cars parked on the road, most of the time, you have lanes that are wider than what you have on the freeway, right? So after the road is built, we have some of these traffic calming options that we can use. Most people tend to think of speed bumps, but there are several other options that can help with that, with controlling speeds. And obviously we have the enforcement component, which is aimed at changing driver behavior. But obviously I'm gonna let Constable Lutz talk about that part. So just quickly going through some pros and cons of the different traffic calming measures. Speed cushions, there's a type of speed bump that have these cuts in the middle, so they allow larger vehicles to navigate through them. And we're thinking about fire trucks, ambulances, emergency vehicles, basically. Apologies.
Oh.
I had a lot of set up and didn't remember it. So they allow for a substantial speed reduction because obviously you don't want to damage your car going over them, right? They can reduce traffic volumes on residential streets because they cause delays, right? So if you have a series of those people who are cutting through a neighborhood, they are going to try to look for other routes. They typically don't have impact on access to the driveways, and they typically don't impact cyclists. Some of the disadvantages is that they may delay some emergency response if you're talking about the traditional speed bumps, but with this design, you can reduce that disadvantage. If you have transit, sometimes transit operators don't like it very much because they cause discomfort to passengers. Winter maintenance becomes a little trickier, and it may increase noise because vehicles are slowing down, accelerating again. So sometimes residents don't like them on their street because of noise. You can also reduce the width of the road with curb extensions, right? Obviously, they're not going to reduce speeds as much as the vertical deflection, as we call it. But like we saw in the images before, like if you have parked vehicles, narrow down the available width of the road, the drivers will naturally slow down because they perceive that their risk is higher in a narrower road. They can also be helpful for pedestrian safety if they reduce crossing distance. If they're well designed, they make the street look nicer as well. And they also don't impact access. But if you have a lot of cyclists and your remaining width is not very generous. It could be tricky for cyclists. You lose some on-street parking, although sometimes they can be used to delineate the parking lane a little better. We can see there's a vehicle there after the curb extension. And they can also be used at intersections, but if you have a lot of buses or trucks making turns, that can be tricky. And obviously winter maintenance can also be affected. You can apply the same concept in the middle of the road with raised median islands, also moderate speed reduction. They don't reduce pedestrian crossing widths as much, but if they're wide enough, they can be a refuge where you take a crossing into 2 stages, and they have less of an impact on winter maintenance. But they may restrict access, right? Especially left turns into drivers and out of driveways, depending on how long they are. They can restrict some of the access. They could also make cyclists feel a bit squeezed towards the curb if the roadway is very narrow. Some lower cost options, I'm sure many of you saw these in some streets around York region. Also, same principle, reducing the width of the road. These elements, they're flexible, so if they're hit, they're not going to break right away. It's going to take a few hits for them to break. They bend and then come back into place. But they may require some regular maintenance because they can accumulate debris around them, and you hit them a good number of times, they're eventually going to break, right? But they're low cost. It's much cheaper than building those islands with curves and everything. They are difficult for winter maintenance, so most municipalities that use them take them out in the winter, right? So you only have half the year where they are effective. And you can just use pavement markings too. So if you do a good job of making the road look a lot narrower, if you just paint a couple of lines, most of the time it's not enough. But if you do something like this with bike lanes, that hatching, that creates that impression on drivers that the road is narrower than it actually is. And again, in the winter, it's mostly covered in snow, so a bit less effective. In terms of enforcement, we're not going to spend too much time on this, but the main principle is that it can target not only speed, but also other types of aggressive driving behaviors. It's part of police routine operations, and then in York region, there are 2 programs that focus on enforcement. One is the Road Watch program, where you can report someone you saw speeding or disrespecting a stop sign or doing any type of aggressive driving behaviors. You can report their license plate on York Region's police website, and maybe I'll let Blair B elaborate on that later on. And there's also this community concern where you can go on York Region's police website and report a more general concern. Like every day there's people street racing between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m. On my street, and then they're going to investigate that. You don't know who it is, you couldn't get a license plate, there's that option as well. Automated speed enforcement is relatively new in Ontario. Obviously the police officers, they do shorter enforcement operations. They can be on the road all the time, while automated speed enforcement can run continuously, right? The only issue in Ontario is that they're only allowed in specific locations like school zones or community safety zones. And they can be fixed or mobile. So the box in the image here is a mobile one. So some municipalities, they install them for 3 months or 1 year, whatever period they decide to do, and move to another location just so that they can cover more of the city with the same equipment. Now, in terms of what Richmond Hill and York Region are doing in terms of traffic safety, York Region is developing what they're calling the Traveler Safety Plan. It's a strategic plan based on the Vision Zero and Safe System principles that we talked about earlier. The idea is to come up with a plan for the 2023 to 2027 period. And it's a really interesting project because it's probably one of the first of its kind in Ontario, at least that I know, because they're not doing this on a bubble. They invited all the local municipalities to collaborate, public health, the police, the school boards. So they invited everyone to be part of the development of this project. And the city of Richmond Hill is in very advanced stages of developing their traffic safety and operations strategy. Similar idea, more focused on the development of policies and procedures to address traffic safety and operations concerns. And the idea is to use data-driven prioritization methodologies to identify what are the locations in the city where we have more speeding issues, like where the speed excess is highest, and where are the pedestrian risks higher, right? Because you need to have, obviously, the taxes we pay go to the city and to the region, and they need to address, the tax funding is not unlimited, right? So they need to choose the locations where they're going to implement different types of measures. So if you use this data-driven approach, you rank those locations. This is the highest risk, and then you go down the list, develop projects so that your tax resources are the benefits of the tax resources are maximized for the entire city, right? And all of these measures, the traffic calming measures that I showed here before, they're actually going to be in this strategy as part of the traffic calming toolbox. It's not all of them, there's a few more, but that's a way for the city to have standardized treatments for different types of situations, depending on how big is the speeding issue, what type of road are we dealing with, right? Is it a school zone? Is it a residential street? Is it a busy or collector road, example? So just in a way of having a consistent way of implementing those measures where they're going to be most effective. And that's what I had for my part. I don't know if you want to do a quick Q&A now or leave everything to the
I
end.
think it's better that possible snooze to do the presentation, and after that we'll have a big Q&A section.
Perfect.
Are you all good?
So thank you, everyone.
Does
I
anyone
have a
want to start?
question actually. I saw the part where there's a percentage of chance of the pedestrian survival. Like I saw 50 kilometers at a certain speed. Is there a factor of distance or it doesn't matter, I guess?
That would be the speed of at the moment of impact, right? If you're,
I see.
more typically, if you're traveling at 50 kilometers per hour and a pedestrian crosses in front of you, you're going to probably brake, and the actual impact speed will be a little lower. That's assuming the actual impact speed.
So it's like, I don't really understand it. So if somebody goes in front, because I'm pretty sure at 50, if there's enough distance, there's, of course, it's not going to, a reaction could stop it.
There's an element, how much distance you need to see something recognized and decide that you have to stop. That influences as well, but that risk is not about the speed that you're traveling, is the speed that the pedestrian is
Already
hit.
hit.
Yeah, exactly. Great.
So,
All yours.
thanks
Yeah,
for
we-
the very
Thank you.
I'm not the second presenter, and from the York Regional Police, Constable Todd Snooks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out this evening. As been introduced as Constable Todd Snooks with York Regional Police, I'm part of our Road Safety Bureau, and I deal with partnerships and programs. So pretty much anything to do with road safety for the entire region of York comes to my desk. So it's a busy portfolio, but I enjoy it. I've been policing now I'm in my 27th year of policing, and I started actually with York Region out of the city of Richmond Hill, and I policed the roads of Richmond Hill for my first 7 years as a frontline officer. For those that have been here a long time, then you would know that that would have been out of the old police station on Major Mac, which is now the parking lot of where the new one is. So that dates myself just a little bit. So tonight I want to talk about common HTA offenses. I want to talk about the MUMS Act. I want to talk about the big 5 dangers that we deal with from a road safety standpoint. I'm going to talk a little bit about penalties and consequences. I'm going to talk a little bit about search and seizure. And I'm going to talk a little bit about arrestable offenses and court proceedings. And all of these topics have to do with road safety. So, common HTA offenses, obviously seatbelt compliance, speeding, stunt driving. All of these offenses, if convicted, can be applied to your driving record. So the ones that are listed here, very common, and you probably recognize some of them. You may have received 1 or 2 tickets based on these, I'm not sure. But in York Region currently, if you are involved in a motor vehicle collision and you are deemed at fault by the officer on scene, you will receive a careless driving ticket. That is the only ticket we give out at motor vehicle collisions. No matter what the offense actually is under the Highway Traffic Act, careless driving is one that captures all of the offenses. Seatbelt compliance, and within Ontario, seatbelt laws came into effect in 1974, so a little while back. They have been in effect since then. Changes to the seatbelt laws came into effect a number of times over the years. One such law would have been the number of people in a vehicle have to match the number of seatbelts available. You can't have more people than there are seatbelts available, and that's a fairly new law in relation to 1974 anyway. So seatbelts assembly must not be removed or altered. Seatbelt assemblies have to be used by the driver, by the passengers, and of course anyone under the age of 16. It is the responsibility of the driver to ensure that that person is seated in their seatbelt properly. Just before I forget, there is a lot of information available to you on the back desks there, and it covers a number of topics that I won't necessarily dig into tonight. One of them would be child seats, and making sure an infant or a child is properly seated in the right seat, whether it's a booster seat or an infant carrier, and making sure that that's done appropriately. So there is some documentation on that. There's a lot of documentation from MAD Canada, obviously to do with impaired driving. There is some information for young drivers, new drivers, and there's also some for senior drivers. We all have a life cycle, unfortunately, and independence does come to an end at one point when it comes to driving. And a key aspect to remember, I think it's the only thing in life right now that I can think of that is not a right. Driving is not a right. It is a privilege. Okay? So keep that in mind. Seatbelt assembly is obviously under the Motor Vehicle Safety Act of Canada. This is where all of these laws come into effect, and they're enforced by the Highway Traffic Act. So the only exception to a vehicle not having to have a seatbelt is anything that was built before 1974, when the seatbelt laws came into effect. So if you still have a 1973 or older vehicle and it's running and in good condition, you don't require a seatbelt. Other than that, everyone should be in a seatbelt and in a proper one and wearing it properly. Under the armpit is not proper. That is the same ticket as if you weren't wearing it. So I have given out that ticket a number of times in my career. If you have an irritation to the shoulder, go to Canadian Tire and buy the nice big pad that goes over top of it, okay? But the idea behind a seatbelt is it's to save your life in the event of a collision. And if you aren't wearing it properly, then it's not doing its job as it was designed. It's scientific how it's been designed, right? It carries your weight forward altogether, right? If it's under your arm, we have seen the disaster of internal injuries because of that, okay? And I was interesting, the number one reason people would tell me that it wasn't my business was that it was their life. And my only response to that is, no, it's not. Every action you do has a ripple effect, and it's my mental health and every first responder's mental health that deal with the effects of the aftermath of an ejection from a vehicle because somebody wasn't wearing their seatbelt. Going to those scenes is not fun, and that's our mental health. So it doesn't just involve you as the individual. Oops, sorry. Jumped really fast there. One of the biggest complaints across the province, doesn't matter what jurisdiction you're in, whether it's Richmond Hill, the city of Richmond Hill, or whether it's up in Manitoulin Island, speeding. Section 128 of the Highway Traffic Act deals with speeding. There is always a victim surcharge that is added to speeding fines. Demerit points start at 16 kilometers over. I think you're likely to see that change in the next number of years. I think you're going to see those demerit points start sooner as we continue to drop the speed limits on most of our urban streets. At 30 kilometers over, you're starting at 4 points. And now, as I'll get into it in a little bit, the MUMS Act has made changes to what used to be 50 kilometers over was stunt driving. And that's on the next slide here. So it is interesting though, most people when you say stunt driving, think of speeding. And that is a big component of stunt driving. But there is a list of almost 50 offenses that you can be done stunt driving under. As an example, obviously doing donuts in the middle of the road, that's stunt driving. Racing is stunt driving. If you're at a light to turn left, and the light turns green for both sides to go through, and you jump ahead and make a left-hand turn ahead of the vehicles that are coming through, that's stunt driving. You're going to lose your car for 14 days and your license for 30 days, because that's stunt driving, okay? So there are a number of offenses, a long list, and you can look those up on the website. Stunt driving is now defined as 50 kilometers over on roads that are posted 80 kilometers or higher. Anything that is posted under 80, which most of you will recognize that a lot of the municipalities and the region itself here in York and many others across the province have started to drop their rural roads from 80 to 70. And of course their more urban roads are being dropped from their 60s to 50s and 50s to 40s. And I think one of the biggest benefits to that 80 to 70 is from an enforcement standpoint. That allows us to start impounding vehicles and taking people's licenses from them when they're doing 40 over the speed limit instead of 50, because 40 is way too fast to begin with. So keep that in mind. The MUMS Act, which was passed by the Ontario government in 2021. MUMS Act is the Moving Ontarians More Safely Act, and that was brought in by the current government. And this is where the extension of the driver's license suspension went from 15 days to 30, and your vehicle impoundment went from 7 days to 14. So pretty much doubled the offense, and that's roadside. Keep in mind, if you're then convicted of it, the offense is $1,000, the first offense. It jumps on the second, I think, to $3,000, and the third is upwards of $10,000 and possible jail time if you're convicted of stunt driving 3 times. So again, increased roadside penalties and those in vehicle impoundments and driver's license suspension. There are also 6 demerit points involved with stunt driving. Dramatic insurance increases. The younger you are, the less likely you will be to get insurance, or the less time that you've had as a driver, the less likely you are to find somebody who will insure you following a stunt conviction. Fines are between $2,000 and $10,000, and prison time up to 6 months. And again, those are cumulative as you go through the system. Again, a 3rd suspension based on a stunt could end you with 2 years of license suspension. And convictions can be up to 10 years. The next big one for us is distracted driving. Distracted driving is by far the #1 killer, above that of impaired driving and all other offenses combined in Ontario. Texting increases a crash risk by 23 times. In 2017, 107 people were killed in collisions involving inattentive drivers, and 17% of all fatalities on Ontario roads in 2017 were because of inattentive driving. We're waiting for the most up-to-date stuff, which is coming from CA very shortly for, I believe, 2019. So. And they've doubled since 2000, the year 2000, the number of deaths because of distracted driving. More than 33% of Ontario high school students, grades 10 and 12, say they have texted while driving, and at least once in the past year. For students in grade 12 alone, the number climbed to 46%. So almost half of Ontario students are texting and driving. Couple on top of the fact that they are inexperienced drivers, and the fact that the roads are getting busier, it makes for a bad combination. So it is a big issue among young drivers, but it is also, again, coming here tonight, three adults on their phones, in their hands, driving Mercedes, BMW, and a Lexus. All 3 have Bluetooth. All 3 cars can do it all for you. All you do is talk to the car, and yet it's still in their hand. And they're talking to it like this while they're driving. It's hard to understand why. So that is the law right there. No person shall drive a vehicle on a highway while holding or using a handheld wireless communication device. The fine, the first offense, is $625 and 3 points. If you fight the ticket and you lose, the fine is $1,000 for first offense upon conviction. Second offense is $2,000 and 6 demerit points and a 7-day suspension. Third offense is $3,000, 6 demerit points, and a 30-day license suspension. Novice drivers, such as G1 and G2 license holders, can face a possible 30-day license suspension for first conviction, 90-day license suspension for second conviction, and a third conviction, their license is canceled. Distracted driving. What counts as distracted driving? Everybody thinks of the cell phone, of course, which is the #1 issue because of social media and everybody needing to stay connected. But here's a clear example of other things that can be going on. Eating and drinking, reading, grooming, smoking or vaping, watching videos. Watching videos is actually a separate offense, but also under the same category. Again, the number of stories I have, I could go on all night and entertain you with stories of what I call stupidity. But I had a young individual blow straight through a stop sign as if it wasn't even there. And as I'm watching them go through, there's lipstick being applied while they're driving with their mirror down. front of their face so that they could see what they were doing, but not what they were supposed to be doing. Good evidence when it comes to court. Another one was an individual on the 404 southbound in stop and go commuter traffic. I'm sitting beside them in a cruiser fully marked, watching them read the newspaper on the steering wheel, playing with their cell phone, which was it was where it should have been, but they were still playing with it. Plus they had a pen in their hand, I think they were doing the crossword. In stop and go traffic. And then he was bewildered why I was giving him a careless driving ticket. So these are the crazy things that we see day to day. And it only takes a second for that collision to occur. The reaction time. That's the definition of a careless driving: when driving a vehicle on a highway without due care and attention. Well, what's your evidence? Well, you had a collision, so you weren't paying attention. Another big one: red light, fail to stop. Now, the interesting thing for me on this one, and this is, I don't know if Richmond Hill's finding it as big an issue. I'll be honest with you, Mayor. I'll give kudos to the city of Richmond Hill. It is where I get the least traffic complaints from the region. So whether that means people just don't report things, or whether it means they're actually better drivers overall happening here in the city of Richmond Hill.
Let's go with the second.
Let's go with the second. Absolutely. So, but this is one of the biggest things that's coming out right now is red light, fail to stop, right-hand turns on red.
Yes.
Somewhere in the last 10 years, and I don't know where it came from, but people don't think they need to stop to turn right.
Yes.
They just look to see if there's any cars coming, and they go. Like, they just keep going. But when they turn this way, that's when the cyclist or the pedestrian who has the right of way steps off the curb, and by the time they look back, they're already 3/4 through the turn, and that's when the impact happens. Right? So they're hit at 30 kilometers an hour as they scoot around the corner. So this is where our fatalities are coming from right now for pedestrians, is our right-hand turns on reds. A red light means stop. And it's amazing the responses you get, but I wasn't going through the intersection. You entered into the intersection after the light turned red. Yeah, but I wasn't going through the intersection. What does a red light mean? Stop. It doesn't mean turn right when you want to. It means stop and make sure it's safe to proceed, whether going straight or right. $260 fine, plus victim surcharge on top of that. And again, each time you get done for a subsequent offense, on most offenses, the penalty increases. Stop signs. Anybody heard the terminology rolling stop?
Yes.
Anybody define a rolling stop for me? Because isn't that two different definitions? One means moving and one means stop. There's no such thing as a rolling stop. You either stop, or your wheels are in continuous motion and you get a ticket. And it was interesting, the number of people that I get, that's their thing. Well, I stopped. Like, do you see the way your vehicle is right now as I'm standing beside you? That stopped. Your wheels aren't moving. Failure to stop at stop signs, again, one of the biggest issues we have is obviously then pedestrians, right? People that are using the road properly, that are being struck, whether it's injuries or fatalities, but disobeying stop signs, it's just commonplace now, unfortunately. People feel that they're yield signs. And granted, in a lot of locations, probably some stop signs should be yield signs, but until they are turned to those, please stop. So this was a terminology. Now, I've actually changed the title of this over the last 2 years as a project. The slow down, move over is the law, obviously, for emergency vehicles. There is a move right now. Mary may have already signed off on something from a resolution from the city of Richmond Hill. I don't know, but you've probably seen one come through councils from other councils in the province looking to expand this beyond just emergency vehicles to also include any vehicles that have a light system. So your tow truck drivers are already included, but Bell Canada, Rogers, anybody that's at the side of the road doing work, your Hydro One, all of those, Alexicon, whatever hydro companies are out there working along the roadside, have their lights going. This law, we're hoping to increase that to include them as well. But what it is simply what it says: slow down. If there's a vehicle, an emergency vehicle on the side of the road, doing a traffic stop or otherwise, in their actions of their duties of the day, you need to slow down. If you can't move over, if it's only one lane available to you, you have to slow right down when you pass them. And otherwise, if you have a lane available, it's law that you move over to that lane and slow down. So I've actually changed it to space. I call it space, leave space, and slow your pace. So, but that is, again, it's the first offense is $400, upwards to $2,000 on conviction. 3 demerit points upon conviction, and a possible suspension of driver's license for up to 2 years. Subsequent offenses within 5 years of that first offense, the dollar value jumps from between $1,000 and $4,000, 3 demerit points, and possible jail time up to 6 months, and a 2-year suspension on your license. So these are newer laws. These are, but not new, but they're newer. And it's the government of the day making sure that we understand as privileged drivers, not rights to driving, that they take the seriousness of safety of our pedestrians, of our vulnerable road users, and of other drivers seriously, as do we at York Regional Police. And that leads us into our vulnerable road users. Obviously pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists also fall under this. Pretty much anybody that's not protected by metal around them is considered a vulnerable road user. One of the things that I won't necessarily be touching too much on tonight, but there is some really good information on as well. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands on this as to how many people have bought their sons and daughters or grandchildren e-scooters or e-bikes, but you have to be 16 years of age to ride them. That's the law. And people are buying them for their 10 and 12-year-olds, and they're racing all over our cities through the parks where they can't be driven by law. They're exactly the same as a bicycle. They are to be ridden on the road, not on the sidewalk. They're not to be ridden by anybody under the age of 16, and there are laws around everyone has to have a helmet on that's riding one. Okay, so there are laws, and all of the information are on a couple cards back there. The unfortunate thing is, in the industry that we have, people are coming up with these great new inventions and throwing them out into the market, and then the government has to go, oh wait, how are we going to control that? And that has to be filtered down to the municipalities from the higher levels of government, and then the municipalities, and then it has to get over to the chiefs of police for the province of Ontario and for across Canada. They got to get that down to the officers and then explain how to enforce those things, and of course half of them are on a pilot project, so they're not fully enforceable in some areas because not certain things are put into place yet. Each municipality has to pick out where they're going to allow them and not allow them through bylaws, otherwise they fall under the Ontario laws. So it's a lot of stuff in the background, but please make yourself aware through the cards that are provided, the postcards, and again, all of this stuff and great information on our website, yrp.ca, to do with all of this stuff that I'm presenting tonight. So quickly, Highway Traffic Act penalties. Obviously, I've named a number as we've gone through, but fines, imprisonment, driving prohibitions, license suspension, demerit points, vehicle impoundment. These are all things that can occur from different levels of Highway Traffic Act offenses. I'm going to touch on search and seizure. A police officer may at any time, without a warrant, stop, enter, and search a motor vehicle that they have reasonable grounds to believe is equipped with or carries or contains a speed measuring warning device. In the province of Ontario and many I think all provinces in Canada, it might not be one or two that maybe there isn't, but in most states now, this is against the law. So these, if an officer has grounds to believe that there is one in the vehicle, they can search that vehicle. If you have one, you're better to hand it over than to have the officer search.
A penalty.
Arrestable offenses, there are 25 offenses under the Highway Traffic Act that an officer can arrest an individual for, a driver or a passenger, depending on the offense. Knowingly making a false statement is one of them. Defacing or altering a license plate, can't really say sticker at this point, but a permit, we can certainly say, but stickers are no longer in place. Attempting to confuse the identity of a license plate. Refusing to identify yourself, either with a driver's license or other means. And if it's done verbally, it has to be something that the officer can verify. Applying for, wrong spot here. Applying for or possessing a license document after they've been suspended or canceled. Driving while license is suspended or canceled. The passenger commits an offense when they fail to identify themselves. If the person is under 16 years of age, the driver can be charged if they don't identify who they are. Careless driving is an arrestable offense. Stunt, so racing on a highway, is an arrestable offense. Making a bet is an arrestable offense to do with racing on a road. Remove, deface, interfere with lawful highway signs, barriers, or driving past one that is there.
Funny note on that.
It does amaze me the number of times I've had to close a road, whether it's for a fatality or otherwise. Usually if a road is closed by a police officer that's on scene, there's a reason for it. We don't close roads arbitrarily, but the number of people that have driven right up to the side of my car, gotten out of their car and said, I need to go that way. No. You're not going that way, but I live just that way. And how long have you lived there? 20 years. So you know another route to get there, right? So keep in mind when the road is closed, the road's closed for a reason. If you need help getting directions somewhere, not a problem. The officer will be more than happy to help direct you around. But yeah, you're not going through. A pedestrian who refuses to accompany a police officer off a prohibited highway is arrestable. Obviously our 400 series, it's in our Queen's Highways, but our King's Highways, they're not, you're not allowed to be on those other than in the vehicle. Fail to remain at the scene of a collision is arrestable. Fail to stop when directed by police is arrestable. And a cyclist failing to correctly identify him or herself is also arrestable. Okay. Keep in mind, a cyclist is the exact same as the driver of a vehicle. They have to identify themselves to the police. And they have to follow all the rules of the road, as do everybody on e-bikes, e-scooters. They have to follow the Highway Traffic Act to a T. Court process. For those that haven't been through it, a defendant can either defend themselves, or they can get a lawyer, or an agent. Prosecutor presents the victims and the public interest. And then there's a back and forth in regards to that information, and the justice of the peace will make a decision of guilty or not guilty. In provincial court, The person who is accused of a crime has to hire their own lawyer. The victim does not need their own lawyer. That's the prosecutor's job on behalf of the government. And witnesses or evidence that is called from both sides, that's when the justice of the peace will make that decision. A defense does not have to prove innocence, they just have to raise reasonable doubt when it comes to Highway Traffic Act. Consequences, again, we've gone over them in previous ones, but again, monetary, insurance problems, loss of license, fewer job opportunities, sometimes limit on travel capacities. The United States does not let impaired drivers over the border. If you've been convicted of impaired driving, you won't be driving over the border. So that overall is just a rundown. There will obviously be lots of questions, and I appreciate any questions, and it can be on the topics that we've discussed tonight, or it can certainly be on anything else policing related, and I will do my best to answer that. Again, I've been in 26 years of policing. I've been in many, many areas of policing. I've just spent the last 5 in the roads.
Let's give a big hand to the presenters.
Thank you.
Information. And so now we are going to the Q&A section. If you want to raise any questions, just quickly raise your hand.
Can someone ride a e-scooter on the road,
Yes, e-scooters are to be ridden on the road like a bicycle.
like a bicycle?
Yes, with a helmet.
Thank you.
16 years or older.
16 years.
16.
Yeah, I find someone
I think we've got that one covered.
riding on an e-bike on the road pretty fast, faster than a car.
They
40 kilometers.
Yeah, there are the cards that are back there tell you what the speed limit that they should be able to go. You can purchase stuff from the States that's not legal here in Canada, and you will get an offense for that. If stopped by a police officer, he can charge you for having a vehicle an e-bike or an e-scooter that goes faster than it's supposed to. If you modify it, just like a lot of people modify their cars, by all means, modify all you want, just don't ride it on our road, right? Modifications are not for the road. So street racing and stunt driving and what we call organized car meets, we follow those very closely. We have a program called The Race, and it's a big problem across the south end of this region. We're on top of it from a social media standpoint, and we track them, and we're usually there before they get to their location and help to dissipate that also. But that's a big problem across as well. Yes?
So on the topic of all those e-vehicles, those new inventions, you do need to identify yourself when you get stopped by an officer, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So say if they're just turned 16, they don't have a driver's license yet. So what type of identification that they would need to carry?
Most would have a student card that would have their picture on it.
Well, with the
if they have a
address.
transit card that has a picture, if they have a health card, they all have pictures
Okay, so
now.
maybe the health, well.
Any type of ID that shows a picture ID that can prove who they are.
Yeah. And I think though, I mean, with all the emission problem, right? I think e-vehicles are most welcome, or starting to be getting most welcome. And I think that the infrastructure for our roads should make some accommodation for all the bikes, the e-bikes and everything else. And in some of the photographs that was presented by the other speaker there, if you narrow the road, it gives the impression to the driver to slow down. So if the roads are wide enough, we should really think about infrastructure of having, the laneways for the bikes and the e-bikes. So on one aspect, you're making the roads narrower, so the driver will be driving slower. On the second aspect, you're promoting the e-vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see a lot of the cities have moved to that design structure with new construction and are working towards where best to then implement or where they can implement based on existing infrastructure. I mean, you take a good example of existing would be something like, Main Street Unionville. right? It's quite narrow already in its original design. So to implement the ideal, there's not physically the space to implement the ideal situation of bike lane, boulevard, roadway, boulevard, bike lane, boulevard, sidewalk, right?
So I suppose
That's the
that-
ideal.
Yeah, I suppose the urban planning in any new subdivision, in any new, should already
Should start to move to
incorporating
that
yeah.
direction, yes. And that's what you'll see a lot of the movement. I do a lot of consulting, for lack of a better word, as the road safety professional for York Regional Police in these conversations, sitting down with the city of Vaughan, with the city of Richmond Hill, with the region. You know, I'm on 13 committees right now, just for work, and that's all to do with partners and municipalities, and going through the one that you mentioned, the Safe Traveler that the region is working on right now. I was just in a meeting for that, 2 meetings for that in the last 2 days. So, yeah, they're working towards those things for sure. And one thing you can be sure of, if you ask anyone in the region or anyone that's ever spoken to me from any of the municipalities, at the bottom of my signature is roundabouts is the answer. And I am pushing that so hard with them. And we actually have the city of Vaughan is implementing a massive one in a new construction that they weren't considering at first. And it wasn't until I said in the meeting, we need to take a second look at that because you have nothing in your way here. Why are you not implementing the roundabout? So. Whoa, far back first. Yep, that's you.
I just want to raise a concern.
Mm-hmm.
During summertime, I noticed some of the residents are using the road as their sport activity. I'm living in Ward 6, and I'm living in a street which is very short. But I can identify there are at least 2 houses. They put the basketball stand on the curb, and the youngster and the kids are using the road as a playground.
Yeah.
Especially when they are off school, there is a lot of traffic going in and out, and it's causing very dangerous for the people there.
Yeah, and funny enough, this was the city of Vaughan, I had a long conversation with a parent, because Markham is the biggest one that has these laneways, where the garages are in the back, and these laneways, personally, terrible design, but, you know, the laneways are 50 meters long before each road, and there's only 7 townhouses with their garages that literally have 4 feet before the road. And that's exactly what's happening is the kids are playing in behind the garages, basketball, hockey, whatever, on a road. But trying to explain that to the parents is like talking to a wall. Like, your kid's on the road. No, they're not, they're in our back, they're behind our garage. Yet it's a road. You know, and then they're complaining about the speed of cars going through there. I'm like, stop sign, 50 meters. They want us in there enforcing speeds. I'm like, it's a 50-meter stretch of road. Where am I gonna sit to do radar? Like, so there has to be a reasonable understanding and a reasonableness from the resident standpoint to say, where is and there's literally a park across the street. So, you know, we can be as, you know, continue to enforce as much as we can, but there is ownership, and I do agree, engineering is the key behind, and design is the key behind, but there still has to be ownership to the driver. You know, and from an enforcement standpoint, drivers are responsible for their actions.
Yeah, a couple of times I approached the parents, trying to advise them is they are actually putting their kids in danger.
Yep.
But what I got is very, very angry eyes.
You and me both. There was another gentleman right here, yeah?
Yeah. I just wanna say it's more of a.
Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna get to this gentleman and then I'll come back to you.
Mine is the Suburban, the seat belts. The people behind, the passengers behind cars, they actually they have to have seat belt.
In the backseat.
In the back seat,
That's the
The
back
back seat, yeah, back seat.
every seatbelt must be buckled if there's a person sitting in a seat.
Okay.
No choice.
Okay. Number two,
If
the,
your child won't do it, make them.
and is if they don't wear the responsibility lies on the driver?
If they're under the age of 16, the responsibility is the driver, yes.
Oh, okay, over 16?
It's the, and then it's the passenger's responsibility.
Okay. And the children, what age group they have to use this seat cover?
The easiest way, there's a pamphlet at the back there that gives you all the details. It's based on size, weight, age.
Is there an age limit?
Again, there's categories for it, but you have to hit at least one of those things in order to move up to the next level. So you're starting in a rear facing as an infant, and then it changes to a front facing, and then there's 5-point harnesses, and then there's your booster seat, right? So all of those are based on age, weight, and height. So you could be a 4-year-old, but be extremely tall and a little heavier set, so you're gonna move up faster even though you're 4, right? Whereas you could be a 12-year-old, like my nephew, and he'll be a really good stock car driver someday, because he's just this tiny, or a jockey, because he looks like he's 4, right? So, just depends, but that information is online as well as on the Ministry of Transportation, as well as the YRP's website, as well as a couple pamphlets back there for the car seats.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, and then we'll come over here.
Let me answer for Closer?
Sorry?
Sorry.
No, I'm just saying you can ask a question.
want
Yeah,
You can sit there. Just have a seat there, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit technical. 2 years ago, I guilty of sorry.
Can you speak louder, please?
Yeah, 2 years ago, I guess I'm guilty. I got pulled over and ticketed for failed to stop at a stop sign.
Right?
I guess I don't talk to the officer, but I'll tell you there was a car in front of me, and he did stop, so he wasn't pulled over, but he stopped like past the stop sign,
Mhm.
like already passed, and then I ended up stopping like just before the line.
Yeah.
So he went, and then I just stopped. So I guess I didn't do a double stop, and I guess you have to wait in line. I don't know. I may be. I actually don't know if I'm still guilty. It's okay. It's long gone.
Without seeing it, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
What should I have done if I should do a double stop again?
Was it a 4-way stop?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the
So I
evidence, I
thought-
can, just on what you've told me, I can probably tell you that the officer's evidence would be that you didn't have the right of way because there was another car from the other direction that would have been next to go, and you followed the one in front of you.
Oh, me.
Even though you may have stopped,
Yeah.
you still went out of turn.
Okay. Thank you.
That would be my guess based on what you told me. Yeah, yes. And I think there was
Giovanni
something.
was talking about traffic calming measures. Roundabouts was not mentioned.
They are a traffic calming measure.
They were on
Did I
Uh,
miss
there. They were on there, you didn't mention it, but it was on there.
Oh, yeah, in the first slide with the whole list, it was there. I just didn't go into the details, but yeah, that's one option. And there are different types of roundabouts. There are big roundabouts, that like arterial roads, like moderate volume arterial roads will have the bigger roundabouts, but in
48 in Bloomington.
sorry.
48 in Bloomington. in
Exactly,
Stouffville.
yeah. But there are options for local streets as well. Sometimes they're called mini roundabouts or traffic circles. I think Vaughan has quite a bit of them. Actually, Richmond Hill has quite a bit of them, some newer subdivisions.
Yeah.
And you can use them to also landscape, make the streets look nicer as well. But yeah, they are traffic calming measure. If in isolation, they're more targeted to preventing preventing angle collisions, which tend to result in have a bigger chance of resulting in injuries, and changing that pattern to more like side swipe, so you don't hit vehicles at a straight angle, but kind of sideways. So they force you to slow down a bit, and if there is a collision, the impact angle is less likely to generate collisions. generate injuries. For speed control, they can be used, like if you have a series of them along the street, they will also help slow down the street in between them. So it's not only as you approach to enter the roundabout, but because it's inconvenient for drivers to speed up, slow down again, speed up, slow down, they tend to maintain a more stable speed throughout the corridor without having, it's the same principle actually as the speed bumps, right? If you use one, you're gonna slow down at that point and then you're gonna do whatever you want. If you have a series of them, you're not going, in between two, you're not gonna speed up to the same level that you would if you didn't have the speed bumps. You're going, because you know you're gonna have to stop again or slow down significantly again. So it manages the speed along the corridor.
I'll give you my little spiel that I give to in these committee meetings to the engineers, and they know this information, but it's good to be reiterated that other people are aware of it. When you take a four-way traffic signal intersection, there are 24 points of conflict where a collision can occur between vehicle, pedestrian, vehicle, cyclist. There's 24 points of contact where that can happen, where a collision can take place. When you turn that into a roundabout, depending on the size of the roundabout, that drops to 8 to 12 points of contact. So you've already eliminated 50% of the opportunity for the collision to even occur at that intersection. Beyond that, as mentioned, you have eliminated head-on collisions. You have eliminated T-bone, where somebody turns left in front of the person coming through, which is the #1 accident at a signalized intersection. And those are the two collisions that kill and cause serious injury. So they are the most expensive collisions. When you put it into a roundabout, all your collisions are now angled and slow speed. And probably 80% of your vehicles are going to bounce as opposed to collide. They're going to sort of bounce off each other. So from that standpoint, then you have to take a look at, and this is where I emphasize to the engineers and to the city councils, you have to look beyond the cost of implementing that roundabout, the initial cost, because it's going to save money in the end. Because the maintenance is just regular road maintenance. You don't have any traffic signals to maintain. You have absolutely no need for police when the lights go out. And we all know we have power failures in this area, in Ontario. And there's no need for a police officer to stand there and do traffic because the intersection takes care of itself, right? The unfortunate incident that happened at Warden and Stowell Road at the end of last year, where we had a double fatality, a mother and her daughter lost their life turning left in front of a dump truck on an amber light. Wouldn't have occurred if that was a roundabout. So that study is being done now for that entire corridor, the Stowell Road corridor from 48 right through to the 404. If you've ever driven through the one at Highway 48 in Bloomington, it's phenomenal, right? So.
Yeah, I think the big roundabouts, people seem to know how to use them. But the little
My
ones,
wife hates them, but.
there's a series of them in Richmond Hill, Jefferson Forest,
Yep,
and then into Tower Hill.
yes,
Yeah, a whole stretch of them.
love it,
Love it.
love it.
My experience has been people are not always aware of who should go first. There's some confusion, like they should go, but they're just sitting there thinking that the other person has to go.
Yeah.
Or not signaling when they are exiting the roundabout. So
It's certainly a learning curve.
I haven't seen any education to the public on how to use a roundabout.
Yeah, so I know the Ministry of Transportation has put out a lot through social media and whatnot. Again, I think a lot of it, I'm gonna say it's still incumbent on the driver, it's still incumbent on the individual to seek out some information sometimes, because I know where I live personally, It was in the newspaper for a number of weeks in a row, it was on social media, it's on the website, the township website, how to function and run those things. I believe we have it on our website, I'll double check, and if it's not, I'll make sure it gets put on there from the YRP standpoint. But the Ministry of Transportation, it's on their website, a full explanation as to how to function a roundabout. People have to start looking for this information, not just waiting for it to be dropped into their lap all the time. Again, it's still our responsibility to get it out there, but people have to go looking for it too, or at least make themselves available to those means of communications.
Maybe at the city level, we should have a bit more presence, because not everybody would look at MTO, social media, or YRP social media.
I stand to be corrected, but we've been through this before with that stretch of roundabouts when I was the councillor for Ward 4. And I'm fairly sure we have links on our website, but if you find that they're not there, then let me know. But I'm fairly sure during that time, education was part of it. And I mean, I must admit, I live in the south part of the ward. I don't go up there as often. It's on a daily basis, so there is a little bit less familiarity, but I think people are becoming more familiar with those. The one issue that we did have, though, I must say, was roundabouts are not quite as pedestrian friendly, but if they're marked properly, and our staff did a great job figuring all that out, and we improved them significantly while I was the
There are
councillor.
some designs out there that are excellent
and we've
for
come up with
pedestrians.
them.
Yeah, definitely. If you're in an urban area where you have active transportation, then you want to take a look at the ones that are specific to that. Because they're definitely, just throwing a roundabout in doesn't solve that problem, but there are designs that are extremely effective for that.
And it is one of the policies that are going to be included in this, the city's traffic safety and operations strategy, which is standard signage, pavement markings, to make it more clear who has the right of way. And that's not just a Richmond Hill situation. Like I've done safety reviews for many other municipalities, and roundabouts or right turn channels. They usually, historically, they have the yield signs, which don't require you to stop, just see if there's someone. But the tendency now, the trend now is to replace those with stop signs or pedestrian crossover signs. I don't know if everyone has seen those. They're white rectangular signs that show pedestrians. There's a tab at the bottom that says stop for pedestrians. That's, I assume legally they're the same as a stop sign if there's a pedestrian about to cross.
Yeah, I
right?
don't want to ever see a stop sign at those, because that would be counterproductive, but certainly from a pedestrian.
A pedestrian crossover
Yes.
sign, yes.
Yeah, you'll see those on.
And then you have, so the older designs, they used to have a yield sign after the crosswalk. And then people didn't really pay much attention to pedestrians. The trend now is to put these pedestrian crossover signs before the crosswalk, and then put the yield sign after, because that will delineate the conflict with the vehicles on the roundabout. But then you introduce a second element, right? First you stop for pedestrians, and then you worry about the vehicles.
The a good example of the right channel location for Richmond Hill is Major Mac and Bathurst.
Yes,
Yes,
me.
Bathurst and Major Mac.
Yeah.
The right-hand channels there, they have the pedestrian crossovers built into those. So that's a really good intersection to take a look at if you haven't been through there, to see what that entails. And that means stopping for the pedestrians before you continue through your right-hand turn.
But also to your point, both the pedestrian crossover and the roundabouts are relatively new in North America, so there is a bit of a learning curve, right? And these Vision Zero or strategic safety plans that your region and the city are developing, for example, they usually have an education component, especially the York region one. Like as I mentioned, they invited public health, the school boards, everyone that's involved in road safety. So there is, the expectation is that there's going to be an educational, a larger educational component related to traffic safety. And usually when you're talking about education things that are unfamiliar to drivers or to road users in general tend to be brought up to the top as a priority topic to cover under these education campaigns. So yes, we do have information on the city website, York Region's website, MTO's website, but like I said, I'm dealing with my things, you know, my tasks during the day. I'm not going to government websites regularly, right? So these strategies, part of them involve developing these education campaigns and then using social media or traditional media to send the message out, right? To reach people instead of just waiting for them to go look for it.
Any other questions?
Any questions? If there's no questions, can I ask one last question? Is yeah, this is regarding the cyclists riding the bikes on road, but on bike lane.
Right.
Will you issue tickets in that situation also? Will you issue tickets to the
If they're
cyclists?
not, if they're not in the bike lanes?
Yep.
Well, again, yes, I mean, that they're not, they can be ticketed for not driving in marked lane. That's an HTA offense. Again, cyclists have to follow the rules of the road under the Highway Traffic Act. And if you're driving a vehicle and you're driving in between two lanes, I can charge you for fail to drive in marked lane, right? If you're driving down the middle, right? So no different, a cyclist that isn't in a defined cycling lane, if there's one available, then they can be charged for not driving in marked lane. I would say probably the majority of roads don't have, and it's shared road space, so now they're riding to the right side of the road. So there is an offense to not riding to the right, but again, depending on what their next movement is, they may want to make a left-hand turn. They've got to cross the lane to get to the left side of the lane to make the proper left-hand turn. So the share the road goes both ways. It means the cyclist has to share the road and the driver has to share the road. They have to work together.
I have.
Yeah, just a second.
Just a quick question. What do you think of unmanned vehicles and if there are any safety studies being done on it?
Well, you're talking about autonomous vehicles. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of studies being done on it. You may know more about that, but certainly I know if anybody's been up on Woodbine Avenue in the Mount Albert area, the new Loblaw, massive, absolutely ginormous warehouse distribution center that's being built there. It's scheduled to have the first autonomous trucks coming out of it. And
computers could
and then what it is they call it platooning, where the first truck has a driver and second and third truck that are traveling directly behind it are directed by computer in some form or fashion. So that's called platooning. So only one of the vehicles has a driver in it and is responsible for the group of them, I guess, in some form or fashion. Now again, whether this is something that's going to happen right away, or to your point, obviously there has to be enough safety studies and there has to be infrastructure for it. I mean, I take my own vehicle, for example, that has driver assist, which a lot of the newer vehicles, higher end vehicles, and I don't have a high end vehicle, I have an electric vehicle. So they have this driver assist built into them where I can turn that on, and if I'm driving on the highway where I have a white line and yellow lines, it will keep it in between those. And if I take the off ramp, I can just hold the wheel lightly and it'll turn itself, and it'll always stay between the lines. And it slows when it needs to because of a car in front of it, and it'll come to a stop if it needs to, and right, and it'll start back up again if it needs to, right? So it's driver assist, but it's not autonomous driving in the sense that, well, sometimes you get onto a rural road and there is no white line on the outside of it. It's just goes from pavement to dirt. There's no line defining that edge. So the computer doesn't read it, so it turns it off. Driver assist goes off. So now I have to control my own car, right? So until all of that infrastructure is in place on every single road, I'm not sure how they're going to do this.
Yeah, so I think the current technology for autonomous vehicles still rely on vision, right?
Yeah.
Instead of human eye, it's cameras. But the software, as powerful as it is, it's not a human brain, right? So we are able sometimes to make judgment calls depending on the situation you find on the road. Like you have your typical situations, like driver expectancy is a term that we use, right? Situations that happen often, we know exactly what to do almost at an automatic level. Sometimes you come across some very unusual situation and you think about and assess, okay, I have to do this. The computers and the autonomous vehicles, they're going to be very, very good at the typical situations. Right? A computer only does what you program it to do, right? It's going to find situations at some point where the software engineer that wrote the program didn't foresee. And it happened before. Famous case, autonomous vehicle in test was driving on the road, and a truck with a big truck with a white box went across, and it was winter time, the background was snow, everything else was white. The computer, the vehicle didn't recognize and it went under the truck, right? So I think we're gonna get there at some point in terms of the technology, but probably what's going to take a bit longer is the legal aspect, right? Who is going to be liable in these mishaps? Thank you. Right, because right now there's a collision, someone got injured, the driver's going to be sued. Right? Autonomous vehicles. Are we even going to own vehicles individually, or because we don't have to? We can call like an autonomous Uber at some point. You don't need to have a car in the driveway, right? So is the fleet owner going to be liable? Is the software engineer going to be liable? The manufacturer? Who's liable, right? I think that discussion will take a lot longer to allow us to hit critical mass, where the infrastructure will also accompany that development, than the actual technology. So, in my opinion, we're gonna get there, and in the big picture, things will be a lot safer, right? Because human perception reaction time on average is 2.5 seconds, right? For a computer, that's an eternity, right? So it can detect and react to typical situations like that, right? And that's how the platooning works, right? Because even if you're designing like a typical traffic signal, there's 4 seconds of startup time once you get the green light, because it's the time that we as humans take to realize and wait for the other car to move, right? Autonomous vehicles, they can react like that in a fraction of a second. But again, that's the typical situation. What's gonna happen when it's a situation that requires judgment? And it's gonna be about the loss.
And the other interesting fact that I keep telling people is when they come, because they will, when they come, what speed are they gonna be going? The posted speed limit.
Yeah.
They're not gonna be speeding. So all these non-autonomous vehicles driving around them, that's why I think it's important for people to start understanding they need to slow down and follow the rules of the road and follow the speeds that are posted in urban areas, because it's coming where you're not going to be able to get around them anyway. So you might as well get the practice in now and keep the roads safe now, because you're going to have autonomous vehicles driving around you at the speed limit. They won't be going 10, 20 over.
And the other interesting fact is that it's not only going to affect efficiency and safety, but it may affect the very urban planning concept, right? Because, like I mentioned before, you as an individual may not need to own a car. You can just call a car. At work, for for example, maybe you don't need as much parking lot space anymore, right? You can start developing more dense use without, if you go to a mall in a suburb, 60% of the area of the mall is parking lots, right? Maybe you don't need that anymore, because you just call on it's probably gonna be like
Or your car's dropping you off and then going back home.
goes
to
back
charge.
home, exactly.
And then I'll come get you when you tell it to. right?
So-
These are all amazing things that are coming, for sure.
Yeah.
Can I say one last one?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry what that is. I have a good one. So in a cyclist point of view, and me with having like high functioning autism, for example,
Mhm.
I can raise concerns in some like this. Let's say you know, like I'm high enough to have a driver's license, like to be able to get one to drive.
Yep.
And of course, I know there are people that are afraid to drive, and because with a bicycle, it's not required to have a license, I guess. I may be wrong, but is it required to have a license for a bicycle?
No.
So I'm pretty sure that's true. So because of that, I'm concerned, like, because maybe some people may not even know the laws of the road. It's like it should like everything that like a driver would.
Right.
Or maybe some people have autism, or some people can't drive. Maybe I heard of epilepsy and stuff like that. So they'll be riding a bike. But and me myself, you and I drive. I cycle too, and like there are places well bike lanes, and it might be a concern. I don't know what you guys do about like people that like to ride their bike. Is that their only transportation maybe?
Yep.
Or but then what's the concern if like maybe like there are exceptions that they're allowed to ride sidewalk or something?
No.
I don't know like.
No, I mean, again, they have to follow the rules of the road. If they're not aware, one of the unfortunate things about the law, or fortunate, whichever way you look at it, is ignorance is not an excuse. So if you are going to go cycling on the road system, it's incumbent upon you to know what you can and can't do. That's your responsibility as a citizen to say, what is required of me to go and do this activity, right? You don't just jump into water without learning how to swim.
I also
right?
I've also noticed I live on Yonge and Royal Orchard,
Mhm.
if you know the area.
I do.
Along that area, of course, is Yonge Street, and I'll be honest, I only did that once, so I rode on the sidewalk. I hope I'm gonna get tickets. But yeah, I don't really ride there at all. I just thought one time I did, and I noticed there's no like
There's no bike lanes on you.
So do I still have to ride on the road?
Yep.
So I could listen with not ride.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary.
Well, yeah, it can be. I don't ride on a bike on the road. If I go cycling, I go mountain biking. I don't trust drivers. You'll never see me on a motorcycle. That's not to say you shouldn't ride a motorcycle, it's just I'm not getting on one because I don't trust other drivers. I want to be safe.
The last question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got,
It's all
yeah,
good.
for, I know that normally we can't cycling on the pedestrian, sidewalks. Is it allowed for the kids under certain or
Yeah.
the size of
Yeah, I
the wheel?
mean, yeah, obviously, smaller kids that are learning how to ride their bikes and whatnot,
Yeah.
not an issue.
But is it a age limit, like
I wouldn't
16
say-
or?
It's hard
or-
to say that there's an age limit, I'd say there's more of
The kid is
a
the kids.
capability
Okay.
aspect, right? Where a parent shouldn't be riding their bike
The sidewalk.
on the sidewalk with
Sidewalk.
their kid, right? In essence.
Yeah.
Because the sidewalk is for pedestrians.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Ideally, in a perfect ideal world, when planners were first starting to plan Ontario,
Okay.
they would have put in bike lanes, bike lanes, road, and sidewalk, like California with CB Valley.
But what if they got charged like the parents bike on the sidewalk? Is it
there
a fine?
charge?
Yeah, is it
Yeah,
charge?
there is. I mean, it's not one that we hand out very often. But
I know, but at least there's
these are
somewhere.
things that are used should there be a problem, should there be a collision. Let's take example, the
Okay.
young lady that lost her life in Oshawa,
Mhm.
riding an e-scooter on the sidewalk, off the sidewalk, through a crosswalk, boom, right-hand turn, done. Right?
Okay. Thank you.
She's at fault.
And he's at fault too, he almost lost his life.
Oh,
For not wearing a helmet. when he was
Oh,
riding a bike.
yeah. Okay. Anyway.
I have a tip for you. There's a bunch of cyclists